according to ESPN, the Chicago Bulls are rumored to go star hunting potentially this offseason, even though I have my doubts about the validity of that. We're also going to look at the rumored contract offer to DeMar Rosen and how that could affect the Chicago Bulls salary cap structure and Bulls most likely not to return to the roster next season. We're getting into all that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content for today. And so, ESPN's Jamal Collier, I should say, said that the Chicago Bulls will be monitoring star players they could trade for or acquire in free agency. In particular, 3 names that have been identified as potential targets for Chicago have been Trey Young, Paul George, and Donovan Mitchell. Now, I'm going to take a look at those 3 players and how realistic is it that the Bulls pursue either one of those guys. Let's start off with Trey Young, right? A player that, to me, has proven he's not a winning player yet. Yes, he has skills as a shooter and as a playmaker, absolutely. But when you have the rise of Kobe White, right, it would make absolutely no sense, in my opinion, to pair Trey Young with Kobe White. The Atlanta Hawks have already tried to do something similar with DeJounte Murray and Trey Young, and DeJounte Murray much more of a better perimeter defender than Kobe White, while Kobe White's a much better scorer, and I just don't see any way in which that goes. Now, you could argue yourself and say that maybe they would have to move Kobe White as part of that deal, and if that's the case, I'm going to look at everybody and say, what the hell are you smoking? If that is what you're asking yourself, is potentially moving Kobe White to bring in Trey Young. Yes, Trey Young is more of a star than Kobe White because he's done it for longer, but let's be clear here. Trey Young is terrible defensively, terrible leadership-wise. He's a crybaby when he's on the court. Yeah, he puts up numbers, and I can't deny the numbers he's able to put up, and he does have big games, and he's had a couple against us when Ayo Dosunmu's not guarding him. But Trey Young is not the type of player, if that the Bulls are going star hunting to really try to find a star to up the ceiling of this team, that I feel that the Chicago Bulls should really look at. He's had some great stretches, averaging almost 26 points per game last year. I think top 15 in the league in points per game and also over 10 assists. You can't deny the statistics of it. But looking outside the box of just statistics, right, which I know a lot of people do look at and weigh very heavily, he's lack of size. You're going to have to definitely cover him up with having nothing but plus defenders around him. And I think ultimately Trey Young is a player that can be effective, and I won't even doubt that Trey Young could be the number one on the team that can maybe go on deep playoff runs, but you have to have a very particular type team, in my opinion, built around him if that's what you're going to do. You need players that are all versatile defensively to help hide him and cover him up, and usually a mobile big, right, who's either a lob threat or definitely is going to be a rim protecting big on the defensive side of the ball, and those are things that we do not have. So unless there is a true and total complete rehaul of this roster, Trey Young being that, I gotta refute the thing there. I know that the Hawks may be looking for Trey Young, and that really feels like on ESPN side of this is that you're taking the fact that most people know the Atlanta Hawks will be looking to either move Trey or move DeJounte Murray, and pairing that with what the Bulls have going on. And for that, I really do not see it. But hey, maybe where the things have happened, and we'll see there. But Bulls fans, let me know what you guys think of the Bulls potentially targeting Trey Young of all players. Well, we'll talk about it. And then the other players that they mentioned here is Paul George and Donovan Mitchell. Now, the Paul George aspect, and we talked about this a little bit on Locked On Bulls, as just a player, right? Just in a vacuum, a player, I love the idea of bringing Paul George here. I love the idea of having him next to Ayo Dosunmu, next to Kobe White, and bringing kind of that two-way contract, that two-way player versatility there, not two-way contract, two-way player versatility there. And I think when Paul George is fully healthy, you know exactly what he can be. Now, there are rumors of Paul George being pursued by the Philadelphia 76ers, who are going to have, I believe, the most cap space with only 3 players under contract heading into next season. Also, the Clippers are probably going to be motivated, especially with Kawhi going down before the start of the playoffs, to keep a player like Paul George. But I still doubt even the Bulls' spending power. When you look at it, the Bulls don't have true cap space, right? We're a little bit under the luxury tax, which I've said before. We're over the salary cap. So, but you need to be, unless Paul George is going to accept a mid-level exception, you need to be under the actual salary cap to be able to sign Paul George. And then you have the options of signing trades, right? And could the Bulls do a double signing trade with Demard and Paul George? Yeah, those are possible. They've been done before. They are extremely rare and overly complicated to get. And then even if you do sign and trade Paul George with like a Zach LaVine contract to send over to the Lakers, keep in mind in the sign and trade, only half of Paul George base level compensation is going to count towards salary matching for Zach LaVine. So with Zach LaVine's contract being over $40 million, if you then still sign Paul George to another $40 million contract, theoretically, only $20 million of that would count towards matching Zach LaVine's $40 million contract. So the Clippers would have to include another $20 million worth of players, and I just don't see that happening. So it would be extremely difficult for the Bulls to land Paul George unless Paul George just says, I want to go to Chicago. That's the only place I want to go. And then in that case, you could find a way to work things out. Or if the Bulls dump a Zach LaVine salary, to, for example, to a Philadelphia 76ers, where they can absorb most of that, then the Bulls can try to use that. Even if the Bulls do use the career-ending injury exception on Lonzo Ball, it wouldn't necessarily clear the space needed to sign a player like Paul George. So that's a little weird, right? Just to say that. Like I said, I love the concept of Paul George being on this team. But again, you're still then going to a over 30-year-old veteran. You are replacing him theoretically with an older player in Demar DeRozan as well, right? I don't think you re-sign DeMar in that case. And yeah, Paul George is still a player that if I had to look at the difference between him and DeMar DeRozan, is Paul George is way more versatile on the offensive side of the ball, is more of a threat to still shoot the three, better defensively as well. So you look at that, is he the closer that DeMar is? No, but maybe you don't have to be in as many close games if that's the case. And next season, he's going to be 34 most of next season. So it's that area again where you're kind of, you're doing some of the same shit, right? But, you know, maybe with a different type of player, you look at it and you convince yourself that it's a way different move. And then you have the Donovan Mitchell part of it. Now, we know that the Bulls tried to move Zach LaVine for Darius Garland before. They at least made the call to gauge that interest. Now, with the Cleveland Cavaliers being worried that Donovan Mitchell could go elsewhere, it could open up the door for them to maybe revisit the table, right? Because it seems like the Cleveland Cavaliers are looking at the Donovan Mitchell situation and basically saying to themselves, we don't want to lose Donovan for nothing. We very well may look to move him this offseason. That's very well what they could look at and say, right? Now, Donovan Mitchell has a $34.8 million contract. So if the Bulls were trying to work something out with a Zach LaVine portion, that is a trade that could theoretically work, right? They'd have to include some other things. Maybe, I don't think you're going to get a Max Strus or anything for it. But they'd have to include something else. A Nang who has an $8.5 million contract. So there is some ways that can happen. Now, the two things that the Bulls would have to look at there is they would have to say, one, the Cleveland Cavaliers would have to be interested in Zach LaVine and replacing him with Donovan Mitchell because Zach has more years left on his contract. Donovan Mitchell, I believe, is next year is his last year on the deal. He does have a player option in 2025-26, so they may be looking to avoid him kind of opting out and them not getting anything back for him. And then on top of that, you then are going very small backcourt with Donovan Mitchell only being, 6'1". He does have that long wingspan. Not the best defensive player. You are adding three-point shooting. You're adding another consistent scorer. Maybe you look at it and say, we can make it work with Kobe and Donovan. Maybe. So that is maybe something that's theoretically possible, right? I just don't know if the Cavs are really going to be interested, even if they do feel their backs up or against the wall and they need to do something so they're not losing Donovan for anything. I just don't know if that's going to be the case. So, those are how I think of the three players that are at least rumored. Now, outside the Bulls, hearing that they're maybe going star hunting in free agency and in the trade market, what trade assets do the Bulls really have? A lot of Bulls fans, and I see you guys in the comments very oftenly say, well, the Bulls have no assets. I think the Bulls have more assets than what kind of people really do think, mainly because we gave up a lot of picks, but after 2025, which you do have a pick owed to the San Antonio Spurs, we own all our first-round picks from 2026 to 2030. Now, there is the protection on the San Antonio Spurs pick is that if it does not convey to them in the 2025 draft, it moves to the 2026 draft. So the Bulls, due to the Stepien rule, can't trade the 2025 pick unless it's at the draft. Once the draft starts, you can move that pick because it's draft day trades are looked at as the team with the pick is making the draft choice. They're just trading it after the fact. But you can't move your 2026 pick. You may not be able to move your 2027 pick if it does convey in 2026, right? Because it's still that option there. So the Bulls really can't trade another pick outright into 2028. Now, the one thing that they can do to make their 2027 first-round pick available in trades is to they can remove the protections in 2025, which may be dangerous for the Bulls considering that's supposed to be a deep draft. And if the Bulls do flame out again, you may be able to keep that pick. They could also reach out to the Spurs and try to remove the protections on the 2026 pick. But then again, the Spurs may be motivated and say, nah, because again, that draft in 2025 is going to be deep. The Bulls pick that they owe to the Spurs is top 10 protected. So if the Bulls do bottom out and have a bad year and their pick falls in the top 10, which, for example, had the Bulls actually dropped to the 10th seed this year, their pick would have been in the top 10, so it would not have conveyed. So, that's something to look at there. So the Bulls do have first-round picks they can move. Theoretically, they have from 2027 to 2030 and onward to move their picks from. So they got first-round picks that they can move, just not those immediate picks. They also have the Portland pick in their repertoire as something that they can also move. Now, the Portland pick, the protections on that are that it's basically lottery protected. So the Portland Trailblazers would have to make the playoffs for the Bulls to be able to get that pick. Now, you could get a team to maybe bite on that as just kind of sweetening the pot, but that's not really something you build a deal around. With how bad the Trailblazers are, does not really seem like they're going to be making the playoffs anytime soon. So you got to look at there. And then, of course, you have players that you can move. Now, the players that I have on this list that are likely to be moved, I have kind of different levels on it. First, we got Zach LaVine. We do know that per Casey Johnson, that the Bulls are expected to revisit the Zach LaVine trade market this offseason. Cool there. Alex Caruso is somebody that could be moved, but we know the Bulls hold that value high. Multiple first-round picks they will want back for Alex Caruso, but we know that if that deal, because they don't want to move on from Alex Caruso, but if a team truly just flames out, for example, in this playoffs and they want to add a player like Alex Caruso, 1 year left on his deal, you then can re-sign him as well. You would own his bird rights, which do become valuable to teams, especially with this new era of the second and first tax apron. So the Bulls could then look potentially in the right deal, move Alex Caruso. And then could the Bulls, now again, I don't think this is going to happen, but the Bulls could theoretically make Ayo Dosunmu or Kobe White available if it's a true superstar, right? Now, again, I'm not saying the Paul George or the Donovan Mitchell trades, but if a true disgruntled superstar comes available and the Bulls want to make their move for that, I get it. Ayo and Kobe have had great seasons, and I do not want to see the Bulls trade Kobe and Ayo. Let me be clear here. But if it's a true superstar, I do think that they can move one of those guys while they're on cost control contracts, pair it with another contract like a Vooch to say you got to take Vooch if you want one of our young studs that just had a breakout year so we can get off that deal as well. That's something that the Bulls could use. I'm not expecting them to, but that is something at the Bulls' disposal that they could use. And then you have players that the Bulls could use as filler. Javon Carter, Dalen Terry, Andre Drummond and Torrey Craig. Drum is an unrestricted free agent. Torrey Craig has a player option, so if he does not pick up that player option, or if he does pick up that player option, maybe he could be used in those deals. But that's really kind of it. Adama Sanogo as a two-way contract. Henry Drell, not really throwing them in there as fillers on deals. Vooch could be a filler if you are moving one of your younger, more team-friendly contracts. But again, I hope the Bulls don't do that. And then, of course, you have the Lonzo Ball contract, which, again, according to Casey Johnson, the Bulls were willing to move this past trade deadline if it was a large deal. So that would have to come through a huge type deal that you're going out and getting a big player for if the Bulls are going to look to move on or use Lonzo Ball's contract as kind of filler in that as well. So those are really the assets that the Bulls have. To kind of recap here, they have all first-round picks from 2027 to 2030. If the 2025 pick does convey, they also will have their own 2026 first-round pick, but they can't trade that due to the Stepien rule. They have the Portland pick, which they could, And then players that they could look to move, Zach LaVine, which we know they're rumored to already be ready to revisit, Alex Caruso in the right deal, Kobe or Io, long shot superstar type move to bring in a big talent here. And then you have your filler contracts in Javon Carter, Dalen Terry, who could be still a promising player that I would like to see develop here. But again, if you're making a move for a starter, a superstar level, you got to give something up. So that's something to look out for there. And then the Lonzo Ball contract. So that's really where the Bulls sit right now, man. And, also when you look at it too, something else that I want to talk about before we get into Will Gottlieb's tweet kind of clarifying the Bulls salary cap situation is Bulls players that may not return, right? And the first one, I do think Javon Carter. I think that, while there's not going to be a lot of teams that may be interested in Javon Carter, if the Bulls are willing and dealing and truly are trying to make moves, Javon Carter's contract, if for nothing else for salary matching purposes, is something that is going to be included in there. So Javon Carter is a player that if you're looking at probably not being in a Bulls uniform next year, if they make big moves, Javon Carter is definitely one of the players that are on that list for sure. And then also one of the aforementioned players, that's Zach LaVine. We know that the Bulls are looking to move Zach. And because of what we're going to talk about with the Will Gottlieb tweet, is that the Bulls are right up against the luxury tax. You offered Demar DeRozan reportedly for 2 years, $80 million. You can only do that if you're moving Zach LaVine, right? You just don't have the salary cap to do that. So Zach LaVine is another player that could not be in a Bulls uniform. And then Torrey Craig. Torrey Craig signed a 2-year, $5.3 million deal. He has a player option for next season. Next season, he's slated to make $2.8 million. And I do think that Torrey Craig is probably going to be able to get more than that out on the open market. So that leaves it to be that Torrey Craig is probably going to be a player that does explore his value with a team that actually is probably competing for a championship, probably get more of that mid-level exception money from one of those teams, not a full mid-level, but more of it. I think that Torrey Craig can easily get that 2.8 on the open market and be on a better team, as well as add some extra years on the back end there. So not too really worried about that. And then the outside chance of Demar DeRozan. Just because of Demar DeRozan being an unrestricted free agent, I have to put him on this list if the Bulls are looking to truly make changes. And AK does say that he can't run the same roster back. There is a chance that Demar DeRozan is not on this team. But with that said, before we end the show today, Will Gottlieb from CHGO Bulls had a great tweet in which he kind of clarified the rumored deal that DeMar DeRozan was offered. So DeMar DeRozan offered a 2-year, $80 million deal, which puts him at $40 million per year. Patrick Williams' qualifying offer is $12.9 million qualifying offer. Andre Drummond, unrestricted free agent. Torrey Craig, as we already talked about, could opt out of his contract. And then you still have Zach and Zoe on the roster. And then you add the 11th pick. That leaves the Bulls at $12.4 million over the tax with 2 open roster spots. And let's be clear here. And as Will clarifies on this, Patrick Williams is probably going to get more than that if he does. Now, he could very well sign for that, right? We know that, for example, Kobe White didn't sign for a deal too much more than that. And with Patrick Williams' injuries, he could be looking at more of a Kobe White type deal. So if he does, that takes more space from Kobe. I mean, from the luxury tax. So what we've heard from AK, and this is Will clarifying this, is that they're not going over the first tax. They're not going over the luxury tax to run this team back. So with that said, if you make that offer to DeMar DeRozan, right, and Lonzo and Zach are still on this roster, you keep your own pick, then you're paying 12.4 over the luxury tax, and you don't even have your mid-level exception. That's not even counting that. That's probably not going to happen. And then if you also look at it, if the Bulls are going to retool with around Kobe, Io, Vooch, and DeMar, with them still being on the roster, you have to move Zach LaVine to not be over the luxury tax. So again, this is a Bulls team that changes have to come. Even if you did want to try to run most of this back, it's just not possible per what we have in the salary cap. So there are moves coming and there are changes coming to this team. And so whether it is one of those players that I listed that may not come back to this team next season or it's something else, the Bulls just aren't in a position to really make a whole hell of a lot of change to this roster this year. So, and the thing is, AK made that statement that they can't run the same roster back. That means that it's going to take some extreme aggressiveness and willing and dealing to make that happen. And AK saying that and opening that press conference up with saying get back to what they did more when they first got here, where they did make a lot of deals. They're going to have to do that if they truly want to change this team, whether it is going after a star in free agency signing trades. We're in for a very interesting offseason for the Bulls because I look at it this way. It's either going to be another pitter-pat of an offseason, or it's going to be one of the more exciting offseasons we've seen for the Chicago Bulls in quite a while. And there's really not much room for it to be anything in between that. It's either going to be quiet or it's going to be extremely active. And we'll see which side that AK and Eversley err on with this team. All right, next topic before we get into the mailbag. We got one voicemail I want to get into. I just want to talk about it. Demar Rosen has officially been listed as a finalist for the NBA's Clutch Player of the Year. Him and Kobe White both. Kobe White, not for Clutch Player. Kobe White also listed as a finalist for Most Improved Player on the Year. So give it up to those players. Like I said, I don't know if Kobe White's going to walk away with it. I think that the way that he ended the season definitely hurt. You look at Alfred Sengun, Tyrese Maxey, and Kobe White are the finalists for that. Tyrese Maxey's probably the bet-on favorite to get that. But again, you never know. Maybe the voters do look at something a little bit different. And then with the Clutch Player of the Year, it's Steph, Shea, and DeMar as the finalists for that. DeMar has the statistics in the clutch to be that. But I don't know. I think they're going to probably reward Steph Curry, especially with the season that he had at his age. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. So keep prayers up to those guys to win those postseason awards. But with that said as well, we do got a voicemail that I want to get into. This one's from Josh.
What up, Haize? This is Josh. I just feel like I gotta somewhat vent and put some pointers out there for this team and what it holds, the future of the offseason. Honestly, I don't think this team is that bad. I think it's just we're missing a piece that I think is very obvious. I feel like we need an actual power forward. I think we need a forward, right? I mean, people, they talk as much smack as they want about Vucevic. And yeah, he may have his, his cons and stuff, but he also has his pros, like the dude when he's in the post, he's honestly a great scorer. I feel like when he lives in the post, he does a great job. The 3-point shot obviously is not there. He shot like 29%, right? I mean, he shouldn't really be shooting those at the volume he does. I think he should only be taking maybe 2 or 3 a game, right? But sometimes he goes and he shoots like 5 a game, right? And he goes like 1 for 5, 1 for 6. I don't think he should be doing that, but I do not think he's as bad as people say. I mean, he's probably been our most consistent player when it comes to actually showing up and being on the court besides DeMar, right? I mean, him and DeMar, at the age they're at, they should not be playing this much games, but they are, right? That also brings me to what I think about what we should do with DeMar. Honestly, I feel like I'm emotionally tied to DeMar. I mean, this is one of the most fun Bulls teams that I was able to watch. Mind you, I'm not necessarily the oldest guy, right? I'm 19, so like I've only really got to watch mediocrity for most of my Bulls, I guess career as a fan. So this team really, I grew onto this team, right? But I also got the chance to watch Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah. You know what I'm saying? That those teams that actually excite you. You know what I'm saying? They played defense. They were dogs. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like we're missing that. And when I look at players like Caruso and I look at players like Javante, Ayo Dosunmu, right? Those guys, they bring that dog mentality that I feel like would fit perfectly if they were on those Derrick Rose teams. And I feel like that's what we're missing. I feel like we need a dog at the four, a lanky guy. Honestly, I'm very high on a player who I don't think a lot of people acknowledge for being an actual, key piece sometimes. Well, I'm not gonna say he's a key piece now, but I feel like he can be if you work him to it. You know what I'm saying? And that's Jalen McDaniels, not Jaden, Jalen, his brother. I think you put Jalen McDaniels on a team where he's actually valued, and I think he'll shine. I mean, we saw glimpses of the 3-point shot.
Listen, Vooch living in the post is what I would love to see from Nikola Vucevic. I do think that really can absolutely help him so much on this team. And I don't know how likely it is that the Bulls are going to be able to move Vooch. So because of that, I would love to see Vooch utilized more in the post. Stop shooting so many threes. Be that dog in the post that you even said, hey, if you take my 3 away, I'm still a pretty damn good post player. Well, be that post player, Vooch. Stop shooting those threes. It was terrible. 29% from 3 this year. Just not going to cut it. Not going to cut it. And as far as this team missing dogs, I always kind of add that to, or I look at that as still that thing that I say is that they're missing identity. This team doesn't have identity, and they need to find it. And I think if this team can ever unlock that identity, that's where things start changing for this basketball team. And so, yeah, we're missing some dogs. You see the impact that Alex Cruz, that Javonte had right away coming back for the Chicago Bulls. You need players with that edge, especially when you don't have a team edge, a team identity. That makes a big difference. But the Bulls also need skill. And I think before we worry about the dog, you need to find skill first and then develop your dogs. Go find them to kind of fill out that roster. And let's hope that the Bulls do that in this offseason, where they are looking reportedly to make some serious changes. We'll see how that works out. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you guys are following the show at Bull Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullcentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See red if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.